In this tutorial, we'll talk about entering sales orders and invoices. For the purposes of our system, a sales order will be something that you'll put in that you might want to do a work order from, or there'll be an order that goes into the system from a customer and maybe you're not fulfilling that order for the next day, the next week, something like that. An invoice, on the other hand, will be an order that you put in, but you'll probably be shipping it right away. For example, monthly janitorial, where you sit down at the end of the month and you enter in that you cleaned a church for 5 times for X amount dollars. That's something that could be done on an invoice. It wouldn't have to go through on a sales order. The process is exactly the same. For this tutorial, we will just use the sales order. But if you're doing an invoice, again, it's the exact same process, except at the very end you're going to actually ship an invoice rather than possibly doing something else with the sales order. For this tutorial, this will end at the time of when you've actually put the order in. If you're going to create a work order or something off of that, that is a separate tutorial. So to start with, we're going to go to Sales and Marketing, Order Processing, and Orders. The system will automatically bring up the last sales order that you're working on, so to get a new one, you can either hit F3 or go to Edit and New, and again you can see that that is the F3 key. So it brings up a blank card. The number here will automatically be signed by the system, so we just want to tab off that field. The customer number, you can enter it by hand if you know it. Otherwise, you can look up the use the arrow to look up the customer. The posting date, order date, document date for what we're working on will be, I'm assuming today's date, or maybe the last day of the end of the month if you're working on billings. One thing to show you in conjunction with that, let's say you're working on month-end billings, but you, let's say you're on the 3rd of the month, but all your stuff goes to the last day of the month. In Pro, we had something called a system date that you could change. However, we never had people change that, because if you did that, it would change the dates for everybody. In Navision, that date is customized only to you, but you still need to make sure that you change the date back. To do that, we want to go to Tools and Work Date. And your work date should be set to today's date, but again, if you're working and let's say you're at the 2nd or 3rd of the month, and everything that you're doing is for the last day of the month, you can change your work date. To do that, you would just simply say OK, and then you would need to, probably on the one that you're working on right now, you would have to update, but for future documents, that would update to the actual work date. Well, when you're done with that, make sure you go to Tools, Work Date, and change that date back. External document date is where you'd put the purchase order number. If your customer is giving you one and you want that reference, that's where that would go. Salesperson, campaign, opportunities, all these will be left blank. On your invoicing tab, you can see that this is a little different. We actually have some parent-child set up for our billing, so that way when the check comes in, we can just pull up the parent and it could go to multiple customers. So this bill to information you can just leave alone. If there's no separate bill to set up in the system, your bill to and your customer information will be the same. But on this invoicing tab, what I want you to look at is your company and cost center. You need to fill this information out. You can do it on the header, or you can do it on a per line item in the line item detail down here. For our purposes though, for this training, we are going to go ahead and enter the company and cost center that we want this to go to. In this case, 03 would be in Albert Lea and the cost center would be MAP. So this sales for Hormel would be going to Albert Lea MAP. Again, we have the lookup features that we can go ahead and use to select the companies that we want to use. Same with the cost center. There is a listing here. Please note that there are 2 new cost centers now in Navision. Wenger now has its own cost center, and Lou Rich and Albert Lea has its own cost center. This is also where you can review the payment terms if something has changed, and also set up the tax information if you need to. Tax information can be set up on a customer basis. So if you see that these are wrong, if you would contact accounts payable or the finance director, and we can get those set up for you. On the shipping tab, right now there are no multiple ship tos set up. If you need those set up, please let us know and we'll work through that. But here we want to take a look at the location code, and this is the actual warehouse of where these items will be shipping from. So in this case, we want to select the Albert Lea warehouse. From here, we shouldn't have anything else that we want to assign. We do not use the last three tabs on here, the foreign trade, e-commerce, or prepayment, so we don't need to do anything there. Next, we'll go down to our line items. We have several different choices for our line items. If you leave this blank, this is like a note field, and you can then do a free form note. You can use this at any place in your invoicing when you want to enter any type of information on there. The next is a GL account. You would maybe use a GL account on an order or an invoice when you invoice freight. If you were going to put, let's say, $50 of freight on this invoice, we would select the GL number, and then we would want to go to our freight. You might want to memorize this account, which is a 50200. Once we tab off of there, our description now becomes freight. We'll have quantity of 1. Unit of measure does not matter. We were going to put $50 on here. And you can also see that our company and cost center now for our freight came in from our invoicing tab of putting this information up here. So again, if you forget to put this information up here, you can manually add it down to the line item as well. So in this case, our $50 of freight will go to the cost of goods sold for Albert Lea. Next, we can either invoice out a part number. So let's say 25 pallets or something like that. That's when we'd want to use our item number. Resource items are for item numbers that we do not assign inventory to, and so that would be like your cleaning services and things like that. We'll eventually get into a fixed asset, and we will not use an item charge. Fixed assets, this listing, even though it's on here, will most likely be used for purchasing and not for invoicing. So you can just ignore those. So the four that you're really going to look for is the blank, GL account, item, and resource. So for this particular order, let's say that we are billing out we'll do envelope checking. So we select our item number and our description. Our location code comes through from our heading from our shipping. So that carries down, and let's say we're going to do 200 of these. The unit price comes from the item card. If that is not correct, you'll need to go in and update the item card. And if that is the only thing that we're going to invoice here, we will go ahead and we can do our post and print and post. If this was an order that had a lot number item to there, if we chose an actual item number and took a lot item number, first of all, you would need quantity in order to actually ship this invoice. But we'd want to go to line and item tracking lines and enter in the lot numbers that are associated with this sales order or this invoice. Sales order obviously do not need item tracking lines at the time of entering them into the system, but to actually go in and ship this sales order or an invoice, you would need those item tracking lines in there. So from there, we are going to go ahead and post or print and post. For the purposes of this tutorial, we're just going to use the post. And we have options now where we can just ship it and we can invoice it later, or ship an invoice, or later on we can come in and simply invoice it. For this purposes, we're just going to say that yes, we already did the envelope checking, we've got our freight on there, and we're going to go ahead and ship an invoice. So we're going to say okay. It's going to scroll through, it's going to post all those items for us, and now our status is released.